if an infinite number of monkeys are given typewriters and allowed to peck away, they will eventually produce all the world's great literature. But monkeys, like humans, also turn out quite a bit of absolute junk.
Says it's going to be a minor buff. Maybe that just means changing some numbers.
He's weak to Anti-Nate, he's weak to Discord, he's weak to Pope, he's weak to Hack.
Mauga, they buffed him and he's fucking broken.
Despite single fire improving accuracy, shooting squishy heroes generally feels terrible.
Mauga has two firing modes. One that farms big targets, and one that takes 10 years to rack up damage on small ones.
Overwatch 2 Season 8 might just be the worst season of all time.
The overhealth is being decreased to 50%. Ammo pool, that's being decreased to 300 bullet. Cardiac overdrive being decreased to 60%. That can cooldown itself increased for 12 seconds. No longer grants infinite ammo.
Overwatch retail patch notes. It's actually worse than I thought. Removed fall off damage penalty. What? Why did we bring back Overwatch 1 Orisa?
This is 1,000 monkeys working at 1,000 typewriters. Soon, they'll have written the greatest
balance
known to man. Let's see.
Orisa plus Sojourn buffs.
You stupid monkey! You shut up.
Oh, another Mauga video. I'm sure that's interesting and inspired new content nobody's ever done before. Sometimes I wonder if anyone in the Blizzard team is paid to check the hero design process for future problems, because, hey, they've done it again. Mauga may not be the worst designed hero to ever be added to Overwatch, but he is probably the most boring. For some reason, Blizzard's reaction to the hero they've been working on for the past 4 years being badly received when it hits quick play is to crank the damage to 10, release it into comp, and then go on holiday. For the past month, Mauga has completely dominated the ladder, and characters like Reinhardt, who have been completely forgotten by the dev team, have been dumpstered by him. But his problems aren't as easy as just being overpowered. That would be simple. Mauga has possibly the worst gameplay loop of any character in Overwatch history, and is essentially a worthless hunk of meat if the enemy team can change 1 or 2 characters just to counter him. It does seem that Blizzard tried to hotfix him to stop everyone's Christmas being ruined, but apparently it failed. I mean, I personally worked in the service industry for a long time, and if nobody there gets to take the busiest and most lucrative time of year off work, I really don't see why a live service game with the most concurrent players over Christmas should be completely left in the dirt for that entire period. But I guess I digress. The other day before the nerf patch came out, I wrote this. Let's be honest, whatever they were hotfixing just wouldn't have done anything to remove the problems regardless, because Mauga fundamentally is just badly constructed, and simple damage or sustainability nerfs ain't gonna cut it to make him interesting. Obviously, I couldn't have predicted quite how bad this patch would be, because not only did they simply nerf his damage and sustainability without addressing why the character feels so bad to play with and against, but the Orisa armor change made her essentially the easiest counter swap at all levels of play. But let me ask you sincerely here, do you think the Orisa armor not preventing crits from Mauga was an intentional part of design, or another oversight and lack of playtesting a pretty simple interaction? Apparently there are more changes coming to make Mauga more aggressive, whatever that means, but I personally don't have any faith that the dev team are going to be able to fix this without me, a random no-name streamer and YouTuber, giving them some pointers. I just can't believe I'm doing this. Alright, I guess let's go. Incentivizing Mauga to lock eyes with the enemy tank and keep shooting them until one of them dies, or more commonly passes out from boredom, is just dumb as bricks. The skill ceiling for him is still pretty high because high level players will be able to track and remove DPS from poking angles by burning them with Mauga. But at any level below Masters, which is a good 95% of the player base, this entire half of his kit is pretty much inaccessible because Maugas just aren't good enough to activate burn on the squishies. Because Mauga's health regen for both his passive and active abilities are directly tied to the damage done, in order to get the maximum health possible, he needs to do the most damage possible, and that just means shooting the enemy tank. Even worse, because it's tied to a burn effect, he's disincentivized from swapping targets because building the burn takes some time, and squishies generally use a purge or movement ability to get out of the way the moment they end up burning, meaning no health regeneration for him. This is a big problem for him because it means he's incredibly matchup dependent. Even before the nerfs, if you played around him Semi-intelligently with a character that can avoid burning, he was just quite frankly still not a good character. For instance, if you just play Sigma against him with Shield, Suck and Rock, he can essentially sit in melee range around an objective from Mauga as long as he wants, while starving Mauga of healing by preventing the burning. Mauga couldn't poke out your backline from the same position because without shooting a tank for health regen, he dies. And he couldn't go into your backline because he generates less health from shooting squishies, and if he gets shield split from healing and Suzu, he dies. Exactly the same can be done with Ram's Shield or Diva's Matrix, and pretty much any dive hero who can avoid him consistently had the same effect. Especially in mirror matchups, every single incentive on this character forces you to lock eye contact with an enemy and shoot them until one of you dies. Surely someone on Team 4 must remember that one time when someone sat on their keyboard and made Bastion invincible in the turret form for like a week that one time. Go figure that giving someone incredibly high damage and, I don't know, incentivizing them to never back out of a fight might mean that people do something along the lines of building a comp that makes them never back out of a fight. It would be like deleting Reinhardt's shield and making him swing on the enemies for damage mitigation. Completely feast or famine as a concept and stupid as hell. I mean, seriously, who came up with this? Sometimes I do forget that we're starting from scratch in terms of some knowledge of past design mistakes with the dev team, because to put it simply, quite a few of them have just left the company. The second problem with Mauga is exactly the same as Roadhog, which everyone's been talking about, which is the fact that they have no ability mitigation. The main reason the game was changed from 6v6 to 5v5 already is because the devs were completely incapable of foreseeing and fixing game design problems that might be caused by new tanks. But the changes to anti-nade with the patch are stupid as hell, and if the dev team aren't capable of making simple changes so that tanks aren't completely turned off by this ability, then they may as well admit for my sanity that the problem with their balancing of tanks wasn't the difficulties of balancing 6v6 in the first place, but just their ability to balance. As my easiest example of this, I really just don't know how Blizzard quote-unquote reworked Roadhog without basically changing anything about his kit, apart from making him uninterruptible and therefore much more obnoxious. But they never touched his interaction with anti-nade at all, meaning that to even out his win rate, he's required to be overpowered in any matchup that doesn't have an Anno on the other team. So we're now in an awkward situation where not only Roadhog but Mauga too, if they're ever playable, all but force a player on the enemy team to swap to Ana so they can completely dumpster them. Then someone on Mauga's team is forced to swap to Kiriko and press the don't die ability or lose the game. Mirror matchups of Roadhog and Mauga are not only dead boring, but in this hero-based game, where the majority of people play to enjoy one or two characters, nobody's enjoying the 5th time they're forced to swap to Kiriko in an evening. Counter-swapping itself is already an issue in the game, and when the counter picks are so good that they essentially become necessary, other players are forced to swap off the heroes they like or they lose. Now, only brave opinions here, but I think not being able to play half the cast in your hero-based shooter isn't what I call fun and engaging game design. But the devs have already gone on record stating that counterpicking will always be an aspect of Overwatch. The exact quote reads as follows: "An important aspect of a hero design philosophy is that heroes should have clear strengths and weaknesses to create more varied and interesting gameplay. When we look to buff a hero, for example, we want to keep this in mind and typically try to focus on a hero's intended strengths rather than clearing away their weaknesses. We do want to avoid counters being too easy and effective without adequate counterplay options, and there's a broad goal of making sure every hero is viable in some capacity and feels good to play, while hopefully not being too unfair to play against. Some direct matchups are not really close, like Roadhog versus Winston, but we don't strictly balance off 1v1 matchups as Overwatch is a team game. Generally we found that when the heroes are balanced closely enough, individual player performance and teamwork has significantly more impact on the outcome of a main match than hero choice does until you reach the highest levels of competition." Now this post, whilst it is relatively correct and innocuous, directly contradicts the balanced choices with Orisa in my opinion made 3 weeks later. And I can only interpret it, for my own sanity, to mean something along the lines of, we're trying to balance it, but it's quite hard. One of the really frustrating things of the Overwatch team is when in the past they've lampshaded an issue by mentioning it and saying they're trying to fix it, when in the long run either they don't take substantial action or the action they take is completely misled. There's not a single human who thinks these Orisa changes aren't going to make her a low skill floor and boring as hell counter to Mauga at all levels of play, if he's played at all. But instead of actually fixing or making him not continue to dumpster the heroes he's good at and terrible against the heroes he's bad at, they design a pressure release valve into the game by giving you the option of swapping to Orisa. I really hope here that it's not too forward to say that putting pressure release valve heroes into your game to counter others is just lazy and stupid. Ana, Orisa, Bastion and Kiriko shouldn't exist to guard the power of one or two heroes. Yes, a small degree of counter swapping is always going to happen, but I want to clearly state here that failing to even out the peaks and valleys between characters and their matchups is a hero design and balance problem, and not a tool inherent to the genre. And that's not even to mention that Orisa is one of the most boring characters to play every time she's meta, despite another Overwatch 2 rework, which in most people's opinion has again completely failed to make a character interesting and engaging. Now that I've stated most of the problems, with my completely unwarranted zeal and assurance of myself, I'm going to give you the actual fixes to make this character reasonable. Tying health regen to essentially damage done is dumb as bricks, and without being changed, regardless of what you do with numbers in terms of damage and survivability, it will still force Mauga to shoot whatever's easiest to crit for survivability, and it will force the amazing staring mirror matchup. If you were to cap the max health regeneration per second and increase the regeneration per crit to make it easier to achieve, he could then poke people at longer range without literally suiciding through lack of healing, and therefore be able to actually use the whole part of his kit. In addition, if you reduce the amount of shots to activate burn, it would allow him to swap targets a little bit more easily, whilst keeping his core gameplay loop of swapping between guns and shooting people for crits and healing. If this still isn't working for stopping him shooting tanks exclusively at most ranks, give him something like a 100 health bonus every time an enemy is lit on fire, meaning that low level players are incentivized to swap more often. With just these 3 easy changes, you've smoothed out his effectiveness against different enemies, including non-tanks, whilst incentivizing him to swap targets more often so that he might do that. Secondly, just making healing part of his sustainability a tool is just dumb as bricks because it forces him to get dumpstered by nade. And I'm just here to tell you that the entire community of Overwatch has already agreed that nade is the monolith of untouchable, perfect, unchangeable abilities. It's just how it is. I don't make the rules. So Blizzard, if you can't balance your way around nade in 5v5, you may as well just admit that the game in this form just isn't properly balanceable by you at all. The really odd thing about this, I find, is that this is really trivially easy to fix. All you have to do is make their healing not count as regular healing, but count as overhealth. That way you keep it so that Anti stops the support being able to give support to them through healing, but it still doesn't counter their ability mitigation, meaning his matchup peaks and valleys against Ana could be evened out without forcing half the other people in the match to pick around him. Honestly, this is one of those fixes that is so trivially easy that it just makes no sense to me whatsoever what the Blizzard design team are doing, trying to bend themselves over backwards to fix it any other way. The third problem is that Mauga just has poor or boring space creation tools. His charge can be used to push out angles or as movement, but normally can't be used in neutral to force space linearly without dying instantly, and overdrive being changed to overshields does give him a space creation tool that can't be nerfed by nade, but again it's an ability that forces you to just lock eyes with the enemy tank until they back off or you die. And we really shouldn't be incentivizing people to just lock eyes with people until they die. The good design is cycles of aggression and disengaging when you're low, not fully committing to every engagement. Tanks should have space creation tools which are both fun to play into and to play against. Personally, I think we should make his charge boop the enemy team backwards instead of upwards, and give it around 150 armor generation on activation so it can be used to force his escape or to force himself into the enemy team when he needs to. With this, you've incentivized him not only to avoid the stare of death where he dies the moment he stops clicking, but you've also made a space creation tool that's interesting at the same time. Not only would these changes not cost you any of your sweet development time, as they're all easily implementable, basically numbers tweaks, not involving anything costly for you like animation. But most importantly for you Blizzard, this keeps Mauga's gunplay and gameplay feel exactly the same whilst reworking his incentive structure to make him a little bit more interesting to play. But again, who knows what Blizzard is actually going to do with the character in the next patch, because it seems like most of their balance changes at the moment are derived from throwing darts at a board instead of some clear and concise goals. I'm throwing my hat back into the ring of content creation. If anyone's still interested in listening to me ramble about Overwatch, which I tend to do quite a bit, well, socials and stuff like that are down below.